demonstrators and millions of other Americans is that as a result of the greed, the recklessness, and the illegal behavior on Wall Street, we were plunged into this horrendous recession we're currently in. Do you agree with that assessment? Did Wall Street's greed and recklessness cause this recession that led to so many people losing their jobs?
It had excessive risk-taking on Wall Street had a lot to do with it, and so did some failures on the part of regulators.
Do you believe that we have made any significant progress since the collapse of Wall Street to suggest that we will not, either in the short term or in the longer term, once again see a collapse on Wall Street and the necessity of a bailout?
Senator, yes, we're making substantial progress, although I would point out that many of the rules implementing, as you point out yourself, many of the rules implementing Dodd-Frank are not yet in force or fully implemented. But I believe as this process goes forward that we will have made a very substantial improvement, yes.
Well, I would respectfully disagree. But let me ask you this on another subject. I get calls in my Vermont office every week from people who are paying 25 or 30% interest rates on their credit cards. Some would argue that that is usury, and yet that is the policy of the largest financial institutions in this country. Do you believe that if the Bank of America or Citigroup is charging somebody 30% interest rates, that that constitutes usury and should be prohibited?
I'd have to know more information, Senator. We've just, the Congress just passed a whole set of rules requiring banks to be much clearer about the information they disclose on credit cards.
Disclosure, that's correct. But
and on practices as well, in terms of
the bottom line is today there are people in America, and I think you won't deny this, who are being charged 25 or 30% interest rates. Now, Congress has passed legislation, which has been in effect for many, many years, limiting the interest rates that credit unions can charge to 15%. Credit unions are doing just fine. Can you give us any reason why Congress should not do the same for the large financial institutions?
I think as long as as there's complete clarity about the conditions of the card and people understand what the provisions are, I'm not quite sure what the basis would be.
What the basis would be is that when people are in bad economic shape, they don't have a whole lot of money they have to borrow. They have no alternative. And right now, with the Bank of America and Citigroup are charging them 30%. I mean, that seems to me to be outrageous. It seems to be usurious, and it seems to be wrong. And I would urge your support to do what you can to make sure that those outrageous interest rates are done away with. The last point is, picking up on a point that I made earlier, I disagree with some of my colleagues here who think that the Fed should not continue to focus on unemployment. As I understand it, Section 13.3 of the Fed Reserve Act does allow you to provide emergency loans to any individual, partnership, or corporation under unusual and exigent circumstances. I would argue that when real unemployment today is 16%, those are unusual circumstances. I believe you do have the emergency authority to provide emergency loans to small businesses so that we can create millions of jobs. Would you give some consideration to doing that?
Well, again, I think there are several other provisions besides unusual and exigent. They include, among other things, that the loans be fully secured. I mean, you couldn't just give a loan without collateral, for example.
Right.
And the other problem is, I mean, of course, with banks and financial institutions, we supervise them, and we know what their financial condition is, and we know that they're solvent when we make them a short-term loan. But we don't have any, we're not banks, we don't have any capacity to evaluate a small business. Why not? Why wouldn't Congress consider, if you think that the banking system's not working, why wouldn't Congress consider its own provision? Congress might, but I would just simply suggest that during the financial crisis, you acted very, very boldly, $16 trillion in revolving loans. I would urge you to try to do the same, give the same line of thought to the unemployment crisis right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Sanders. Representative Campbell.